Hello guys, welcome back to our YouTube channel. In this video we are gonna see, what if Naruto got harem with Fem Kyubi and Hinata? Part 3. If you want more awesome fan fiction like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. So without wasting any time, let's get into the video. Naruto limped into his bedroom using the door frame to hold himself up. He glanced down at his body, as though noticing his injuries for the first time, and grimaced at the sight of his flayed arm. He didn't want to worry Hinata-chan. After a moment's deliberation, he tore off his t-shirt and bound it around the offending limb, a small but rapidly growing stain appearing on the black material as it soaked up his blood. Kyuubi's chakra was working overtime, providing enough blood to prevent Naruto just bleeding to death, leaving little energy to actually repair his wounds. Happy that he had hidden the injury most likely to worry Hinata, Naruto made his way across the bedroom, stumbling slightly as he lost the support of the door frame. Reaching his closet, he pulled it open. Sarutobi's eyes widened slightly as he saw Hinata. Hinata blinked a few times, her eyes getting reaccustomed to the light after the darkness of the closet. Her breath hitched as she saw the state Naruto was in. Naruto-kun. She breathed, catching a movement on the edge of her vision. She shifted her gaze. Hokage-sama. She spluttered. Naruto gave a small relieved smile. "You're safe, Hinata-chan," he said happily, reaching out with his left hand, gently prying the necklace from her grip and placing it round his neck. "I'm glad," he muttered quietly as he finally allowed his body the rest it was demanding and collapsed in an undignified pile on the floor. Hinata stared at Naruto's unconscious form in silence. "Naruto-kun," she whispered fearfully. "Naruto-kun," she repeated desperately, her body shaking with grief as tears rolling down her cheeks. "What happened?" she asked, her voice sounding hollow and broken and her gaze never leaving Naruto. Sarutobi shook his head sadly, scooping up the poor child's body. "I'm not really sure, we'll have to ask Naruto when he wakes up," he replied carefully, unsure how much Naruto would want his friend to know and how much it would be wise to tell the young girl. Hinata perked up slightly, hope shining in her eyes. Why? You mean he's not?" Her breath caught in her throat and she found herself unable to finish her question. "Ed?" Sarutobi finished for her, shaking his head. "No, he's not. But he lost so much." Hinata questioned, confused. She could see the shirt around his arm was almost totally drenched in his blood. She didn't even want to think what kind of wound it hid for him to bleed that much, and he was bleeding from a good number of other wounds. Everything she had been taught at the academy told her these were fatal wounds. "Well, Naruto-san is special," Sarutobi answered evasively, "but he needs to get to the hospital fast. You should just head home. I doubt he'll be waking up for a good few hours." In truth, he didn't know how long the fox would be able to prevent Naruto bleeding out, but he wanted to end this conversation before Hinata asked any more difficult questions. Hinata's eyes widened and she nodded, swallowing her questions. "Why? Yes, Hokage-sama," she replied. How stupid was she? Naruto had been bleeding to death and she had been holding him up to ask some silly questions. Sarutobi gave an internal sigh of relief and waved the Hyuga goodbye as he leapt out of Naruto's house and towards the hospital, and may Kami have mercy on the doctors if they decided not to treat Naruto, because he wouldn't. Hinata ambled back towards the Hyuga compound slowly, her body moving more or less on autopilot as her brain worked furiously to try and decipher what exactly had happened to Naruto. A heavy blush took root as she drew a conclusion: he had been protecting her. But from what? She puzzled, running through her memories of the night to try and find any clues and finding nothing. She automatically resisted the urge to give a very un-Hyuga-like sigh of annoyance as she drew a complete blank. Maybe she should go see Shikamaru. She recalled him being very good at solving puzzles, at least when he could be bothered. She passed the street where the Hyuga compound was situated and kept walking. Yes, she would go Shikamaru after all, it couldn't hurt and she might get some of the answers she craved. Naruto gave a bleary groan as he opened his eyes, staring for a moment at the white ceiling. His nostrils flared as he caught the scent of antiseptic. Yep, this was the hospital, alright. He was dimly aware that nothing seemed to hurt anymore and idly wondered if it was merely the effects of painkillers or if Kyuubi-chan had fixed him up already. He froze, his heart monitor beeping frantically as he realized he needed to talk to Kyuubi-chan. A nurse outside his room heard the sudden increase in heart rate and rushed off to find a doctor. Closing his eyes, he hastily reopened the link and entered his Mindscape. His body slumping back against his pillow as his mind turned inwards just as a small team of doctors burst in. Naruto reopened his eyes and gave a small smile at the vast expanse of forest that spread out from in all directions. Taking a moment to orientate himself, he realized he wasn't very far from Kyuubi-chan's house and began to move towards it. He hoped she was home, otherwise he would have to spend hours tracking her down to apologize for cutting her off. He craved her forgiveness, and the fact that he had done something to cause her sadness ate away at him, even with the knowledge he had done it to keep her from harm. He walked up to the deceptively small wooden house. He would have made it larger, but originally he had only constructed it as a place to house the door to the corridor of memories, as he called it. It was only later he had expanded the insides of the building to give Kyuubi somewhere to stay when she was in her human form. Taking a deep breath, he knocked on the wooden door. "Kyuubi-chan?" he asked softly. If Kyuubi heard him, then she didn't reply, and after a moment standing outside, Naruto tried the door and found it to be locked. Frowning gently, he tried once more. "Kyuubi-chan, please answer the door." He called a little louder. He knew she was inside, otherwise the door wouldn't have been locked. Thinking about it, he didn't know why he had even put a lock on the door in the first place. It wasn't like anyone apart from him, and Kyuubi-chan could come here. Naruto frowned when he once again got no answer. "I'm coming in now, ready or not," he warned as he turned the door handle. A brief moment of concentration, yielding the satisfying sound of tumblers turning in the locking mechanism before the door swung open. Stepping inside, he scanned the room. It was fairly large, colored in warm red, with light streaming in from windows that didn't exist on the outside of the building, and a grand fireplace dominated the far wall. As far as furniture went, it was fairly sparse. A sofa sat in front of the fireplace flanked by two end tables. A large bookcase stood along the wall to his left, full to the brim with books, and some cabinets displayed a variety of weapons, some of which appeared to deny conventional physics. Those ones hurt the eyes if you stared at them too hard. There were only 4 doors leading off from this main room: Kyuubi-chan's bedroom, an onsen, the memory corridor, and a training room. Making his way across the room, Naruto opened the door to the training room, peering inside and finding it empty. Sighing, he skipped the door to the onsen. He doubted she was in there anyway, and paused outside the door to his memories. "No, Kyuubi-chan can't be in there. I always get that weird deja vu feeling when she's rifling through my old memories," he mused. That only left her bedroom, so Kyuubi-chan has to be in here. Naruto thought victoriously as he put a hand on the bedroom door and slowly opened it. "Kyuubi-chan?" he asked tenderly as he peered in. Like the living room, her bedroom was decorated predominantly in warms, reds and wood, the room dominated by a massive queen-size bed. Kyuubi was curled up on the bed, her arms around her legs and her eyes red and puffy from crying. She must have cried herself to sleep. Naruto's heart wrenched at the sight as he slowly moved closer, gently brushing a few strands of hair back into place. "Kyuubi-chan?" he whispered. "It's me, Naruto." Kyuubi stirred slightly from her fitful sleep. "Naruto-kun?" she asked blearily, opening her eyes. Naruto gave a sad smile. "Yeah," he confirmed. Kyuubi sprung at Naruto, wrapping her arms around him and hugging him tight. "You're okay," she yelled. "Oh, thank Kami." Naruto stiffened slightly in her grip. This certainly wasn't the reaction he had been expecting from her. With a resounding slap, Kyuubi's hand connected with Naruto's cheek. "That's for making me worry about you," she hissed. Naruto lifted a hand to his cheek. The slap hadn't hurt, just surprised him. "I was protecting you," he retorted hotly. He hated making Kyuubi sad, but if it stopped her from getting hurt, we would do it again and again. "You don't need to take it all on yourself, Naruto. Let me help. Let me bear some of the pain," Kyuubi demanded. Naruto shook his head vehemently. "No. I won't. I love you and I refuse to let anything hurt you. Think about how I feel," Kyuubi snapped. "I am. That's why I'm protecting you," Naruto retorted angrily. Was it really so hard to accept that he would do anything to keep her safe and happy? "How do you think I feel watching you suffer and not being able to help? How do you think it feels to watch the person you love almost die? How do you think it feels to actually feel his life slowly drain away? I was so scared for you, so scared." She had started angrily, but her anger had bled into sadness by the end of her rant. She was crying into Naruto's shoulder, noting with mild surprise that her eyes had filled with tears. She had been sure she'd cried herself dry the night before. Naruto wrapped his arms around her, rubbing her back in what he hoped was a reassuring manner. "I'm sorry," he said softly, Kyuubi's words echoing around his head, twisting a dagger in his heart as he realized just how much he had hurt Kyuubi. I didn't know." Kyuubi sniffed. "Promise me?" she asked, her voice muffled as her head was buried in her shoulder. "Promise you what?" Naruto asked. "That you won't do something like this again," Kyuubi requested, lifting her face back out of Naruto's shoulder. "Promise me," she pleaded. Naruto leant forward and gently pressed his lips against hers. "I promise," he whispered lovingly. Kyuubi gave a very small nod, her lips seeking out Naruto's once more. "Thank you," she whispered softly. They remained together for a while longer, each taking comfort in the presence of the other, their lips occasionally meeting in gentle kisses. "I should get back to the real world," Naruto finally spoke up reluctantly. "I don't want the doctors declaring me dead whilst I'm in here," he joked with a grin. Kyuubi smiled back, albeit weakly. "Okay then, it's time you activate your bloodline." Naruto paused halfway out of Kyuubi's arms. "Really? Why?" Kyuubi grinned. "The Sharingan is awakened by life-threatening situations," she supplied, hoping Naruto would see what she meant. Naruto thought for a moment. "And so is the Gijim." He grinned and leant forward, giving Kyuubi a quick kiss. "See you later." He pulled a face. "Not like the stupid doctors are going to let me go anywhere." Kyuubi giggled. "Yeah, see you later, Naruto-kun." Naruto shot her one last smile as he faded from the mindscape. Naruto's eyes snapped open, startling the doctor that had leant over his face. "It's alive." The man gasped. Naruto frowned when he heard the mumblings of "damn it." From a few of the doctors in the room, most of them treated him only because the Hokage ordered it, but they definitely didn't like it. "What happened to your eyes?" Someone gasped, the other doctors muttering in low voices. Naruto caught only snippets of since his hearing was currently unenhanced. He resisted the smug smirk that tried to place itself on his lips as he heard the word Kekkei Genkai being thrown around. Naruto frowned. "What do you mean?" he asked, sounding curious although he had a very good idea of what they were talking about. Their medical curiosity overriding their inherent dislike for the boy. For the moment a doctor rushed out and retrieved a hand mirror, opening it up and letting Naruto see his new eyes. His eyes were a dark purple color with two distinct pupils that remained the electric blue of his original eyes. Each pupil appeared capable of independent movement as one in each eye focused on the mirror, whilst the other darted around taking in the room. Once more he had to resist a smile. Kyuubi-chan had done an amazing job on the illusion. "Thank you," Kyuubi replied happily. She and Naruto had talked about the design a lot, but she had made some last-minute changes to the shades of the eye, as well as the movements of the two pupils. "Oh that?" Naruto mumbled softly, "This kinda happens from time to time, it should shut off again in a while." The doctor's eyes widened. "He has a new Kekkei Genkai." They glanced at each other before a woman stepped forward, leaning in and giving Naruto her best smile. Although Naruto brushed it aside easily, he remembered that same woman refusing to treat him many times before. "Can you tell us what these eyes do?" she asked. "They change color." Naruto declared happily. "It's so awesome, my eyes can go from blue to purple." He pouted. "Although I wish I could control the change, then I could really freak people out." He watched the faces of the doctors collapse at his childish answer, storing that memory away to laugh at later. "It's a new Kekkei Genkai, he's only just awakened it, we really can't expect him to know how it works." One of the older doctors spoke up. Naruto realized that the crowd of doctors in his room was steadily increasing. Clearly someone had spread the word that he had awakened a new Kekkei Genkai. Through the woman who had been talking to him agreed, her name tag gave him the name. "Dr. Furiko, maybe we should take a blood sample to see if we can determine its ancestry." Naruto froze up. Crap. "A blood sample will show I don't have anything, won't it?" Naruto panicked. "No, don't worry." Kyuubi soothed him, sounding slightly amused by her container's panic and secretly proud that he had at least taken something from their dreamscape study sessions. "Blood samples from you are useless." "What do you mean?" Naruto questioned. "Why won't it work?" "It works for everyone." "Not for you." Kyuubi repeated. "Why not?" Naruto questioned, paying minimal attention to the hushed discussions of the doctors as they debated the need for a blood sample. "I'll explain later." Kyuubi offered. "It's a long explanation." Naruto gave a slight nod although he frowned slightly. "I hate waiting," he groused to himself. "Once the doctors leave." "Once the doctors leave." Kyuubi confirmed with an unseen nod. Shifting his focus to the real world, Naruto poured chakra into his senses, pleased to find they all stabilized within a few seconds. "So are you going to take a sample or not?" he demanded. He wanted these doctors to get out so he could talk to Kyuubi-chan. The small crowd turned to face Naruto. In their debate they seemed to have forgotten the boy was even there. "We have decided that is unnecessary for the moment." Dr. Furiko spoke up, although a few of the doctors grumbled about the decision, even as he announced it. "However, should anything develop beyond the changes to eye pigmentation and the double pupils, we feel that a blood test may become necessary." Aside from a few people insisting on the blood test, the majority of the doctors had felt that until it had been proven to have some form of beneficial effect, they should not label it a Kekkei Genkai or treat it as such, since in doing so, they would be helping the demon. No, they would sit back and wait. If this mutation developed into something useful, then the demon child might make it interesting test subject for new Kekkei Genkai, otherwise he was just a useless freak. As the decisions was made, the doctors began to trickle back out of the room, returning from whence they came. Dr. Furiko, however, lingered behind. "Can you feel any chakra around your eyes?" she asked, her voice filled with false concern. Naruto closed his eyes and scrunched his face up in his best idea of what he looked like whilst concentrating. He lapsed into silence for a brief moment. "Yeah. There's some chakra there," he finally announced. The only chakra in his eyes was the chakra that was enhancing his vision. Kyuubi had written the genjutsu for his eyes into the seal, so it couldn't be dispelled, and all Naruto had to do was pour a little chakra into the seal to turn it on. Kyuubi had informed his of this, along with a firm reiteration of never letting anyone see her seal since now. To anyone well versed in the art of sealing, it would also show the truth behind his eyes. Dr. Furiko nodded, making an interested him. She paused for a moment. "Okay, try removing the chakra." Naruto gave no verbal response, but removed the chakra from the seal, the genjutsu fading, leaving him with his original eyes. "Did something happen?" he questioned. "My eyes felt kinda tingly for a sec." Dr. Furiko gave a pleased smile, her theory confirmed. His eyes were controlled by chakra like the Sharingan and Byakugan. Your eyes are back to normal. She informed him curtly, her voice losing its falsified kindness. Now her medical curiosity was sated. With that she turned to leave. Let the demon figure out how to turn that useless, currently, mutant Kekkei Genkai on again by himself. Naruto waited until Dr. Furiko had left the room before rolling to his left and wrenching the IV from his arm. It had, during his previous visits to the hospital, contained all manner of carcinogenic substances. Naruto glanced down at his arm for just long enough to see the puncture wound in his arm beginning to close. He gave a small smile as he leant back in the bed and closed his eyes and followed the rhythmic dripping, finding himself in his mindscape once again. He wandered through the plains, his eyes darting around as he searched for Kyuubi. Hey. Kyuubi-chan. Naruto called as he caught sight of her reclining against a tree and ran over to her. Hey Naruto-kun, over here. Kyuubi waved at Naruto as he trotted to her. Naruto smiled as he sat down next to her, giving her a small kiss on the cheek. Missed you. He said softly. Kyuubi blushed fairly and shifted over, settling herself in Naruto's lap, enjoying the bright crimson his cheeks went. Missed you too. She agreed as she leant against his chest with a satisfied sigh. Naruto wrapped his arms around Kyuubi. So why won't blood tests work? He questioned. Kyuubi looked down. It's because of my Yauki. She explained, your body is in a constant state of balance with your enhanced regeneration, fixing your cells as fast as my Yauki kills them. But I thought my regeneration was your Yauki. Naruto frowned, confused. Kyuubi shook her head. No, it's not. Exposure to Yauki has caused some kind of mutation that accelerated the rate at which your cells divide. Your metabolism increased in order to compensate for all the extra energy this splitting takes. She gave almost inaudible sigh. If my Yauki wasn't killing off the cells almost as fast as they divide, then they would probably develop into cancer-like cysts. The more Yauki in your body, the faster this division will become and the faster your regeneration will function. Naruto frowned, but isn't your Yauki killing them as fast as they get made? How can it heal me? Well, the simple answer is your body flares Yauki in the injured area almost unconsciously. That temporarily accelerates the cell division, as cells will take their energy from Yauki and seals the wound shut. I'm not entirely sure of how much damage you can take before you will be unable to fix it or what limits there, and I don't really want to have to find out. It wasn't the whole truth nor particularly accurate, but it was the general gist of it and simple enough for Naruto to understand. If problems arose because of this explanation, she would correct him, but otherwise he could keep believing the simplified version. Naruto gave a faint somber nod. Oh, okay, so why does that mean I can't have a blood test? Well, anything taken from your body will quickly die from Yauki poisoning. It might be possible if the doctor was quick enough, but we're talking a matter of seconds, so it's unlikely. Kyuubi explained. Oh, okay. Naruto smiled softly. I get it now, that's awesome. He grinned. So why didn't you tell me before? Kyuubi looked to his side, avoiding Naruto's gaze. Well, I didn't want to tell you. It was my fault that you lost your only solid link to your parents. She mumbled. Naruto paused for a second. Oh, a blood test could have told me who my parents were, couldn't it? He muttered, then frowned. Then why didn't the old man ever try it? Kyuubi frowned too. He didn't? She asked. Naruto shook his head. No, all he said was that there was no record of who my parents were. He muttered, why would the old man not try that? Kyuubi gave a low growl. There's no reason, unless he was trying to keep something from you. She muttered. You think he knows who my parents are? Naruto asked. Kyuubi gave a faint nod. Yeah, there's something I'd like to check. She stood up and held out her hand for Naruto, who happily accepted, threading his hand into hers as they walked towards her house. What do we need to check? Naruto asked, curious. Your memory of your mum. I've got an idea of who was holding you. Kyuubi replied, silently pleading to every deity she knew that she was wrong. Naruto didn't deserve to be betrayed by one of the few people he really trusted. Naruto's eyes widened before narrowing. The old man was carrying me. I think so, I don't know for sure. Kyuubi said sadly as she stepped inside and headed to the memory door. Naruto took a calming breath and nodded, facing the door. I guess there's one way to find out. He mumbled quietly. Closing his eyes and focusing on the memory as he stepped into the corridor and finding only the one door. A small smile passed across his face despite his somber mood. He was proud of the improvements he had made in his memory walking techniques. He stood outside the door shaking. Please, please. He chalked out to any higher being that happened to be listening, let it not be the old man. He took a stealing breath and stepped through the door. The world around him shifted and warped, color fading to black. Slowly Naruto's vision returned and he found himself once again in his memory and gave a small mental shudder. It still felt weird inhabiting his younger body like this. The demon has been sealed. The man holding him confirmed, stepping closer and handing Naruto to the woman. Your son is a hero, Kushina. Naruto strained his mind focusing on the voice of the man who had just handed him to his mother, comparing it to the voice of the old man. It was different, less strained and world-weary, and much stringier than the voice he was used to, but it was undeniably Sarutobi's voice. He ejected himself from the memory immediately and forcefully, suddenly snapping back to his mindscape, the sudden shift sending a powerful wave of nausea through him that went unheeded as he threw himself into Kyuubi's arms, tears streaming down his cheeks as he fought to hold them back. Kyuubi rubbed his back comfortingly. "What is it?" she asked softly, although she knew what his answer would be. "It was him, the old man lied to me," Naruto muttered, taking a deep shuddering breath and blinking the last of the tears from his eyes. "He's just like everyone else." Kyuubi hugged Naruto closer. "Not everyone, I don't lie to you, and neither does Hinata," she pointed out, "at least about anything important," she finished silently. Naruto gave a small nod and a smile. "Yeah. You're right." He lifted his head and planted a soft chaste kiss on her lips. "Thanks." Kyuubi smiled, resting her forehead against his. "No problem," she replied, planting her lips on his in a considerably less chaste kiss. Naruto closed his eyes, a gentle blush coloring his cheeks as he broke away from Kyuubi's kiss, forcing the pain of betrayal to the back of his mind. It was his problem, and he would deal with it himself. He quickly snapped up the first thought that ran through his brain that wouldn't bring up more unwanted emotions. "So, is there any way I can make your Yaki not hurt me?" Kyuubi paused for a brief moment before giving a small nod. "There is," she confirmed, "but you won't like it," she added, shaking her head slightly. A small frown decorated Naruto's face. Surely if Yaki was as awesome as Kyuubi-chan had said, it would be worth trying. "What do you mean? What is it?" he inquired. There was another short pause before, giving a small sigh, Kyuubi explained. "Yaki, and chakra for that matter, will continue to damage your body as long as you are human. The only way to prevent it is to become a Hanyu." "A Hanyu?" Naruto echoed, not recognizing the term. "What's that? And what do you mean my chakra hurts me?" "It doesn't. Does it? The Hanyu is a half-demon, you wouldn't be human, but nor would you be a full-blooded demon, and yes, your chakra does hurt you. What do you think chakra burns are?" Kyuubi answered. "But aren't chakra burns natural? Kinda like your muscles hurting after training for a long time?" Naruto ventured, confused as to what Kyuubi meant. Kyuubi shook her head. "No, they're different." She paused for breath before elaborating. "Chakra burns occur when too much chakra builds up in one area and begins to poison and destroy the body. It occurs because humans were never meant to have chakra, your bodies simply aren't built to cope with it." Naruto gave a small gasp. "We're not, but we're born with it. Look at how many people use it. And how many jutsu we've made. What about our chakra coils? And if not, how did we get it?" He asked his questions rapidly, giving Kyuubi no chance to reply. Kyuubi gave a soft sigh. She supposed she really should have seen this coming, since she had just pulled the rug from under his worldview, so to speak. "It's true, most humans are born with some ability to use chakra," she conceded, "but that means absolutely nothing. Traits can be introduced to a species all too easily, mutations occur all the time, and sometimes a useless mutation will still spread and become the norm." "Huh?" Naruto spluttered. "Mutations? What are you talking about? What does that have to do with chakra?" Kyuubi shook her head. "Gotta remember to keep it simple for Naruto-kun." She murmured to herself. "Okay, does everyone use chakra?" she asked, hoping this tactic would help the blonde boy understand better. "No." Naruto replied, quickly wondering where Kyuubi was going. "That in itself should be enough proof," Kyuubi announced, looking at Naruto and seeing his confused look. She elaborated further. "If you had evolved to use chakra, it would be like a limb to you. Someone unable to use chakra would be like someone without legs or arms. All demons, no matter how small, can use Yaki to some extent. It's ingrained into our very being." Naruto nodded in understanding. "Oh." He paused. "Then how did we get our chakra?" "Short version, you got it from us demons," Kyuubi replied. Naruto nodded. "How?" he asked, curious. Kyuubi slid a little closer to Naruto and grinned sultrily, kissing him gently. "We made it with you." She all but purred, enjoying the crimson blush that exploded across Naruto's cheeks. "Oh?" Naruto spluttered, quickly clamping down on the little part of his brain that had dipped into the knowledge gleaned from his ill-gotten Uchiha collection to provide images of him and Kyuubi mating. He didn't completely understand how mating with demons could lead to humans with chakra, but too embarrassed to press the issue. Kyuubi giggled silently as she watched Naruto squirm in embarrassment. "You better not be having pervy thoughts, Naruto-kun," she purred, moaning out the kun into his ear. Naruto stiffened, squeezing his eyes shut and screaming the mantra, "Not a pervert," in his head, desperately trying to eliminate the images as they appeared with rapidly lessening success. "No," he managed to choke out. Kyuubi grinned. "Good," she announced, moving away, the seductiveness leaving her voice as though it had never been there. Naruto might not be ready for anything to happen, but that didn't mean she wasn't going to tease him. Naruto took another minute or so to compose himself before opening his eyes, glancing warily at Kyuubi. "You said something about becoming a Hano." Hanyu? Kyuubi corrected gently, she had been hoping Naruto had forgotten about that, and yes, I did. How? And what would happen? Naruto asked curious. A slight frown graced Kyuubi's features, he couldn't really be considering it, could he? He had suffered enough without this setting him further apart from the villagers. She had only told him because she couldn't bring herself to lie to him so soon after he learned about Sarutobi team's betrayal. It's kind of complicated but simply put, in order to turn you into a Hanyu I'd have to alter your regeneration to create Hanyu cells, then purge your body with Yauki, about a tail's worth, to kill every human cell. Naruto nodded, that definitely sounded painful, and what would happen to me? Well, you'd be weakened for a little while, whilst your body purged the last remnants of your human chakra and finished adapting. Then you'd have to learn how to use your new Yauki and learn your new body, but you'd be much stronger and faster than any normal human could hope to be. Beyond that I don't really know, every Hanyu is different. Kyuubi thought for a second. Oh, and you'll almost definitely grow a tail. Or two. Naruto nodded silent as he considered his options, but before he could reply Kyuubi cut in, we can talk later, you've got a visitor. Who? Naruto asked, putting aside his mental debate for now. Wake up and find out. Kyuubi replied. Alright, but if it's someone mean I'm going to get you back. Naruto declared, earning a giggle from Kyuubi. Naruto grunted softly as he opened his eyes, finding himself staring into the teary lavender orbs of a certain Hyuga-Eris Hinata. He croaked, finding his throat surprisingly dry. Hinata froze as she saw Naruto's eyes opening, he was okay. Naruto. She cried happily, diving into his chest, her eyes filling with fresh tears. You're okay. She mumbled, resting her head against his chest, her tears wetting his sheets. Naruto reached out and rubbed her back slightly awkwardly, he still wasn't very good at comforting people. Shhh, I'm fine. He said softly, I don't die that easily. But you're arm. Hinata protested, her stutter returning in full force as her emotions quieted. Naruto glanced at his right arm, which was swathed in bandages. He shrugged dismissively, I've had worse. Admittedly, the flaying had been something Naruto hadn't experienced before, and he was surprised the villagers had even found something that hadn't been done to him, but it had left his arm largely intact, which was more than it had been after some of his worst beatings. Hinata's eyes widened. She questioned, her voice barely rising above a whisper, her stuttering this time induced by dread. What had he been through that he could shrug of a wound that had bled that much? Naruto nodded solemnly. Yeah. He confirmed, a tiny frown graced Hinata's face. If he had been hurt as badly as he claimed, then wouldn't he have some scars? Waving off the follow-up question he knew was coming, Naruto continued, it's not important, what's important is that you're okay. He smiled at her. You're okay, aren't you? Hinata was torn between anger and happiness. On the one hand, Naruto was willing to risk his life to save her, but on the other, Naruto was willing to throw his life away for her. Naruto watched her face, seeing the strange mix of emotions running through her eyes in the short silence that followed his statement. Unable to really express any emotion in words, she burrowed her head deeper into Naruto's shoulder, breathing in his scent deeply. She stayed there for a few seconds, her face flushed from their closeness, before speaking once more. Why? She asked, her voice a soft whisper. Naruto gave a soft snort. I always protect my precious people. He replied, squeezing her gently. I won't let anyone hurt you. Hinata nodded softly, refusing to move her head from Naruto's shoulder, as she took comfort from his presence. She refused to let him get hurt like this anymore. And especially not to save a failure like her. Naruto pulled his arms from around her, tugging at the bandages on his arm. They were beginning to rub annoying against his arm. Pass me a kunai. He asked, a soft frown furrowing his brow. Hinata looked up. What? Why? She asked, frantically looking around for any hidden enemies. Naruto grinned softly, as once more her emotions allowed her to overcome her stuttering, if only for a moment. Don't worry. He placated the shy girl, holding up his right arm, just want to get rid of these stupid bandages. Hinata gave a little gasp. Your arm circuit C. Can't be healed A. Already. She objected, she had seen how much it had bleeding, and it hadn't even been a day since he'd gotten it. Naruto gave a confused little frown. Kyuubi-chan, it's healed isn't it? He asked. Yes, it's healed. Kyuubi confirmed. Naruto smiled at Hinata. Nah, it's fine. He reassured her, tugging at the bandages once more. Hinata hesitated for a fraction of a second before dipping a hand into her kunai pouch and handing one of her kunai to Naruto, who took it with a grateful smile. Thanks. He flipped the kunai into a reverse grip and quickly split open his bandages with a precision that only came with practice. Hinata averted her gaze as the sharp metal of the kunai began to tear through the soft linen bandages. Despite his reassurance, she was sure his arm was still going to be injured or scarred in some way. However, when she heard the soft noise of linen coupled with Naruto's relieved sigh, a surge of morbid fascination swept through her, and she opened an eye, just a crack, looked at his uncovered arm. A gasp tore its way from her throat and her other eyes snapped open. He was fine. The only thing she could find wrong with his arm was that it appeared white pale compared to the rest of his tanned skin. There was a line around halfway up his forearm where his tanned skin suddenly changed to the pale untanned skin. In fact, Hinata could see other small patches of lighter skin all over his arms and even a few on his face. She silently wondered if there were any more patches elsewhere on his body, her face growing redder as she began to imagine Naruto without clothes. Naruto flexed the arm a few times, running a hand over the new flesh absently. It was smooth, much smoother than his skin had been before. He guessed it was probably because no hair had grown in yet and shrugged the problem aside. He paused for a moment before picking up the kunai knife on his bed sheets. "Oh right. This is yours." He smiled, flicked the knife round, so he was holding it by the blade and the handle was pointed at Hinata. Hinata took the kunai gingerly from Naruto's hand and slid it back into its place in the pouch at her hip. Thanks. She stuttered with a small smile. Naruto grinned. "No problem," he replied, silently wondering exactly what she was even thanking him for. It had been her kunai in the first place, he was just returning it. There was another moment of silence. Hinata was debating about asking Naruto about why there had been a mob out for him in the first place. She wasn't stupid, and the closet hadn't been soundproofed, so she knew that they had been targeting him. Shikamaru hadn't been very helpful either. When she had spoken to him, he had merely given a grunt, mumbled troublesome, and got into his thinking pose, as she liked to call it, and finally told her he really needed more information before he could reach a proper conclusion. "Naruto K.K.Kun." She finally spoke, having made her mind up. Naruto's quiet grunt let her know he was listening. Why were those P. No, they didn't deserve to be called people. Monsters mean to you? Hinata felt Naruto tensing under her, and she heard his heart rate jump up at the question. There was a tense moment of silence, and she, for the first time since she had placed it there, lifted her head off Naruto's shoulder and tried to look him in the eyes, only to find he was avoiding her gaze. "I'm sorry," she backtracked, thinking she had crossed some kind of line, although she burned with a desire to know why he had been beaten like this and why the Hokage hadn't even looked surprised at the situation. It just wasn't worth losing Naruto's affection over. In her mind, nothing was worth that. "Ish. Shouldn't have as. Asked," she added when Naruto stayed silent. "No," Naruto said softly, his voice far too quiet in Hinata's opinion. "It's okay, he gave a small sad sigh. "I just can't tell you yet, I'm sorry, I just can't." He met her gaze and gave her a melancholy smile. "I will tell you, but just not yet, not now, later." He reached out, pressing a hand against her cheek and rubbing it tenderly. "Okay." Hinata blushed, opening her mouth to reply, but finding her voice had deserted her and making do with a nod. This was a side of Naruto she had never seen before, so tender and almost vulnerable. Naruto smiled once again, his smile a little happier now. "Thank you." He spoke in that same soft voice. He leant forward and gently pulled Hinata's head forward too, their lips meeting in a loving chaste kiss. Hinata kissed back without really thinking for about a second before realizing what she was doing and with whom she was doing it. Her shyness slammed into her brain with all the force of a runaway Akimichi, and she threw herself backwards away from Naruto, as though burned, her face lighting in a luminescent blush as she fought against a tide of blackness that threatened to overcome her mind. Hinata-chan, Hinata-chan. Wake up, Hinata-chan." Naruto intoned, shaking her shoulders gently. He knew why she fainted now and, although he was flattered and slightly amused by it, he still found it worrying that Hinata fell unconscious so often. Hinata's eyes fluttered and, with a soft groan, she lifted her head. What happened?" she mumbled. Naruto chuckled softly. "You fainted after I kissed you." Hinata blushed. "Yes, that's right, Naruto had kissed her." Could you she tried to ask, trailing off and staring at the sheets. Naruto gave a small grin. "You want me to kiss you again?" he guessed. Hinata gave a faint nod, still staring at the bed. Naruto gently reached out and turned her head as he leant and planted his lips gently on hers, his arms wrapping around her petite form and holding her close. Hinata kissed back softly, letting Naruto lead the kiss, her mind whirling. "Naruto-kun is kissing me. I'm kissing Naruto-kun." Naruto broke the kiss slowly, savoring the taste and texture of her lips, and gave her a small smile. "You have no idea how long I've wanted to do that." He muttered quietly, silently musing how different it was kissing Hinata than Kyuubi. Hinata was shy and let Naruto lead the kiss, following behind him, where Kyuubi fought with Naruto for the right to lead the kiss. He also noted Hinata didn't possess the same skill in kissing that he or Kyuubi did, although he was certain she would get better with practice. Hinata's blushed a little deeper. She questioned. Naruto-kun had wanted to kiss her. "Yeah." Naruto replied with an eager nod which turned into a seductive grin stolen straight from Kyuubi, "and it was great. We definitely need to do that more often." Hinata's blush rose another level, which Naruto immediately dubbed Hinata Ultra Blush Mark VE. He chuckled quietly to himself as he waited for her to compose herself. Why?Wait. She finally managed to get out. It seemed to go against everything she knew about Naruto. If he wanted to do something he usually did it, to hell with the consequences. I didn't want to scare you away. Naruto replied, rubbing her back absently. You're just so cute and shy. He grinned and planted a kiss on her nose. I was scared that being too forward would scare you away from me. His eyes darkened slightly. I just wouldn't be able to cope with you hating me too. I won't lose another precious person. He took a deep breath to calm himself, forcing back his negative emotions and shunting them to the back of his mind, where they belonged. Hinata's eyes widened at the last statement. What did he mean by another? Just what had Naruto been through? And why did he think she wouldn't want to be kissed? Wanted to kiss you too Naruto K.Kun, she admitted. You mean we could have been kissing all this time? He pouted, forcing Hinata to cover her giggles with a hand. You really mean that? He asked more seriously. Hinata blushed and nodded yes. She confirmed. Naruto's face lit up in a radiant smile, and he snuck another quick kiss from Hinata, his lips brushing against hers almost too fast for her to react. Want to go on a quick date? He asked. Hinata blushed. Aren't you supposed to stay in hospital? She questioned. Naruto gave a nervous grin. Well, kinda yeah. He conceded, but I'm fine, see. He held up his recently unbandaged arm. So I figure, since I'm not injured, I don't really need to stay here. There was a minute pause before adding in a quiet whisper, besides the less I stay here the less chance the doctors get to do something to me. Hinata, hanging on Naruto's words, caught the final bit but brushed it aside as being related to Naruto's strong dislike for needles. She was silent for a while, a war waging in her head, on the one hand another date with Naruto. But on the other, he was in the hospital and she wanted him to get better. But if you get hurt? She objected worriedly. Tears sprung into Naruto's eyes unbidden. Hinata truly cared about his safety. Someone really honestly cared about him other than Kyuubi-chan, Old Man Tucci, AMD-chan, and Hawk. He stopped himself from adding Sarutobi to that list, the still fresh sting of betrayal tempering his joy somewhat. Diving forward, he pulled Hinata into a tight hug, his grin growing ever so slightly at the surprise deep his actions earned from Hinata. Thank you. He whispered reverently. Hinata blushed, enjoying the close contact with Naruto. Even as she tried to puzzle out why he had reacted like this, he acted like he had been expecting a card but had received a lavish piece of jewelry or something similarly expensive. She was rapidly discovering an entirely new side to Naruto, one that she had never seen him use around anyone, not even in Ichiraku's where he had seemed so relaxed. A little surge of smugness followed that thought. Naruto had opened up to her, and only her. Naruto broke the hug, giving Hinata a deep kiss, his eyes shining with the tears of happiness he refused to let fall. After I get out. He confirmed happily as, regrettably, their lips separated once more. Hinata blushed and nodded eagerly, giving him a shy smile. I can't wait. She replied, Naruto's smile growing ever larger. Hinata was definitely starting to break out of that shell of hers. He made a quick note to talk to Kyuubi-chan and ensure that date went perfectly. Hinata glanced at the clock, noting the time with a mixture of shock and sadness. Had it really been that long? Sorry. I've got to go. She sighed sadly, desperately wishing Naruto would produce a good reason for her missing her clan meeting. Naruto gave a small nod of acceptance. Okay then. He gave her a smile and leant forward to plant a small kiss on her cheek. See you tomorrow. Hinata nodded. Tomorrow. She agreed readily. Naruto grinned. Hopefully I'll be out of this stupid place by then. He pulled a face showing just what he thought of the hospital. Hinata giggled gently and stood in place for a moment before darting forward and sneaking a brief kiss from Naruto, this time on the lips, and then retreating from the room with a bright blush. Naruto chuckled gently as he watched her go. Yep, she was definitely emerging from her shell. Naruto smiled as he took his test from Iruka, nodding his head slightly at his favorite teaching in thanks. Picking up his pencil, he reflected back on how the last few months had gone. According to Kyuubi-chan, the gears of democracy should be well and truly moving by now in regards to his Kekkei Genkai. Naruto was delighted that he could use his dreamscape without worry, and he found no end of amusement in how easy it was to fool everyone in the village. Even if the Hokage gave him odd, almost disbelieving looks whenever he brought up the subject of his Gijim, not that he talked with Sarutobi much anymore, the sting of betrayal had faded but hadn't faded completely. Kyuubi on the other hand was ecstatic. Her plans were working perfectly from what she had seen and overheard. She had seen the daughters of people on the council begin to treat Naruto better already. Obviously the decision about the Kra had already been made and the crafty old bastards were trying to position themselves to take maximum advantage of it when the news went public. Shaking himself out of his revelry, Naruto turned his attention to the exam paper in front of him, a small smirk flashing across his features. Was this it? Honestly. He had expected more. Last year's test had been way harder, as had the one before that. Choosing not to look the gift horse in the mouth, he quickly filled in the paper. Flipped his completed paper over. Naruto first glanced at the clock. Quarter of an hour. He groaned softly, his head flopping forward and impacting the desk. He was going to die of boredom. Especially since Kyuubi-chan was asleep right now. At his desk, Mizuki allowed a small malicious smile to form on his lips as he saw Naruto's forehead meet the wooden desk. To think he had been worried that he hadn't been able to give the demon a harder test this time. The citizens of Konoha could rest easier knowing that that thing would never be a ninja. Are you okay Naruto K.Ku? Kun. Hinata whispered, giving her boyfriend a worried glance. Naruto turned his head slightly to look at Hinata, silently proud of her slow emergence from the wall of shyness she had built around herself. She was stuttering less every day, and her fainting spells only manifested if he caught her by surprise or if her mind went deep into the gutter. He could tell some of his playful side had rubbed off on her too, although that particular newly discovered facet of her personality only made itself known when she was fairly certain they were alone. Worried. Naruto moaned out. Hinata stifled a giggle with her hand just fin. Fini. F. Finish the T.tt. Then. She advised. I did, that's why I'm worried. Naruto replied. Hinata's eyes widened in shock. Really? She glanced at her own paper and flicked to the end. She had 2 questions left that would take, by her best guesstimation, half the remaining 14 minutes. Naruto gave a nod of confirmation, shifting his arms off his paper and flashing the finished questions at her. Well then check them. She offered after a moment of answering the next question to placate Iruka's watchful gaze. You Hinata-chan. He whined, I'm too awesome to make mistakes. He grinned as he got a muffled giggle from the girl. Iruka cleared his throat loudly, shooting a baleful glare at Naruto. Is there something you wish to say, Naruto-san? Naruto nodded. I finished the test and… He made a show of clearing his throat. I'm worried. Iruka raised an eyebrow as the class giggled at Naruto's outburst. Are you sure? Have you checked your answers? Hinata sent Naruto a brief told you so look as Iruka echoed her earlier words. Naruto grinned and nodded. Yeah, I'm done. He affirmed. Iruka sighed and nodded. Alright then, hand in your test and you can leave, but be back here before past. I mean it, don't be late. Sakura's hand shot up. I'm done too, can I leave as well? Iruka sighed softly but nodded yes, hand in your paper and you can go. Sakura smiled, getting up out of her seat and handing in her paper before slipping out of the classroom. Naruto hung back for a moment as he gathered up his paper. Hurry up and finish, and we can have some alone time before the next test. He whispered to Hinata as he straightened, his eyes lingering on Hinata long enough to catch her blush and smile at him, nodding her agreement. Naruto handed his test to Iruka with a smile and paused at the door to blow Hinata a kiss, making the girl blush harder before stepping outside. Naruto was still waiting against the wall when Hinata slipped out of the room about 5 minutes later. He grinned. Hey Hinata-chan. He greeted, sweeping the girl into his arms and kissing her softly. Hinata moaned quietly, wrapping her arms around Naruto as she kissed back. As they broke the kiss, she turned and leant against Naruto, his hand circling round her waist. How do you think you did? She asked, inwardly proud of getting out a full sentence without a stutter. Naruto chuckled, giving her a gentle squeeze. I told you, I'm too awesome to make mistakes. He declared, leaning in and nipping her neck tenderly, making the young Hyuga groan softly. How did you do? I think I did. Ditto. The understandably rather flustered girl replied, squirming under Naruto's gentle attack on the exposed flesh of her neck. Okay? Naruto snorted. I bet you aced it, cause you're way smarter than me, so if I did well you'll have got like perfect marks. Hinata blushed under Naruto's praise. What if you got p.per. Pages. Perfect marks then. Would the world explode? She retorted with a little giggle at the adorable, in her opinion, pout that formed on Naruto's face. Meanie? He grumbled. No kisses for you. Although he never let up his soft rain of kisses on her neck. Hinata grinned softly. That means none for you either. She pointed out. Naruto frowned. Damn, didn't think of that. Well then I guess the punishment has to be more kisses. He declared. Hinata's giggles were cut off as Naruto gently turned her head and kissed her lips, the two of them lapsing into an easy silence as they waited for the first test to end. As the first test wound to a close, those that had left began gathering back outside the classroom, drifting into groups of friends as they chatted over how they did in the test and what answers they gave. Alright, all of you can come back in now. Iruka spoke loudly so his voice would carry over the many quiet conversations. Hinata pushed herself gently out of Naruto's arms, already missing their reassuring warmth, and gave him a small smile as the two of them made their way back inside to their usual seats in the upper left corner of the room. Iruka waited at his desk for the class to settle back down. Alright then, everyone please follow Mizuki-san to the practice grounds for Taijutsu and throwing weapon assessment. Mizuki's eyes lingered on Naruto, the demon seemed to have done well at the test, actually, why don't you take them out for the physical tests? He offered. I'm afraid I'm not feeling at my best, so I'll stay and grade the papers. Iruka nodded, pushing himself up, not able to resist sending a soft smirk Mizuki's way. I told you you'd regret drinking that in the morning. Mizuki shook his head, forcing a good-natured chuckle. Yeah. Iruka grinned. Alright, change of plans, you guys are following me outside for the physical tests. The class filed out behind Iruka, leaving the stuffy classroom behind them as they walked the familiar route to the practice grounds behind the academy. Naruto led Hinata to the base of a large oak tree and settled down against a broad trunk, giving a happy sigh at the welcome cool of the shade. Sit with me. Hinata gave a small nod, settling down next to Naruto as they watched the class take their tests, neither of them really paying any attention to anything, just enjoying the moment. Until, Hinata. Iruka's voice called out. Hinata climbed to her feet, smoothing out her clothes, and began to make her way towards their teacher when she felt a hand grip her arm, lightly, so that she wouldn't get hurt, but she wasn't pulling free either. Glancing behind her, she noted it was Naruto's arm. He leant forward, stealing a quick kiss from her, an act that tinted both their cheeks a soft red. I know you'll do great. He whispered tenderly, calming the ever-present self-doubt her family had instilled in her. Go show them how awesome my girlfriend is. He added loudly, beaming as he saw her smile grow slightly bigger as the girl's blush climb a few shades. Hinata turned and walked toward Iruka, taking the proffered weaponry, 6 kunai and 6 shuriken, and turning to face the targets. There were 5 mannequins, each a meter apart, the closest 5 meters from the line she was to throw from, and the furthest 10 meters from that line. In order to pass, you needed to hit the closest target with at least half your weapons, and at least 3 of those hits had to be in lethal areas. Of course, extra points were awarded for hitting more distant targets, hitting with more weapons, or getting more killing blows. She took a calming breath, glancing back at Naruto, who gave her a broad grin and a thumbs up. He believed in her, and she wouldn't let him down. She chose the target as 7 meters, a nice middle ground that she was fairly confident she would be able to hit, and let fly, closing her eyes as the last shuriken whistled from her fingers. She didn't want to look, not wanting to see her failure. Good job. Iruka smiled, her teacher's voice coupled with Naruto's excited whoop, giving her the confidence to open her eyes and peer at her chosen target. 4 of her kunai had impacted, 2 in the head, 1 roughly over the heart and the 4th in the mannequin's thigh, and she had hit with 5 of her 6 shuriken. In fact, 4 of her throwing stars were lodged in the target's throat. The other 2 weren't kill shots, but they definitely would have disabled a real person, 1 in its foot, and the last had embedded itself in the dummy's crotch. Hinata's face split into a broad, very un-Hyuga-like grin. I did it. She said happily, that many hits on the 7-meter target, easily passing the exam. She rushed at Naruto and dove into his arms with a happy laugh. Naruto chuckled, squeezing Hinata close. I knew you would. He agreed softly, relishing the brief moment where he could see Hinata totally without her shell. Of course, a moment later Hinata's shyness caught up with her, and with a strangledeep, she burrowed her head into Naruto's chest. Everyone had seen her throw herself at Naruto like that. She could feel their eyes on her back as they watched, a few boys muttering darkly about that lucky little bastard getting the cute Hyuga, whilst the girls wondered not so silently about how she could have chosen the dead last over Sasuke. Iruka gave a soft chuckle. Ah, young love, anyway. He spoke up next. We have Yadra, Jason. Come forward and get your weapons. The crowd turned from the couple to observe how their next classmate did in the test. Naruto felt Hinata relax now the class wasn't paying attention to them, and gave her a soft squeeze. Did you really need to hit that thing in the man parts? He questioned with a grin. I mean, Komen, that's harsh. Hinata blushed. I did. I didn't mean to. She stuttered. Naruto laughed. Just promise me, no matter how mad you get, you'll never stab me there. Hinata's blush rose through a few shades as her thoughts drifted to Naruto's crotch. Promise. She agreed, Naruto giving an over-exaggerated sigh of relief. Unless why you really deserve it. She continued with a soft giggle. Naruto laughed softly. Oh no. He mock cried. Hinata's gonna stab my boy parts. Some on him. His little act was abruptly halted as a scandalized Hinata clamped her hand over his mouth, her eyes darting around to see if anyone had heard his little declaration. The loud collective squeal announced that Iruka had called for Sasuke. Stupid test, I wanna hug Hinata-chan some more. Naruto grumbled softly, making sure he was loud enough for Hinata to hear. However, as he stretched out his muscles he smiled at her. I'm up after the emo king. Hinata nodded. No. She hesitated for a second, glancing at the crowd before, satisfied no one was watching, leaning forward and planting a soft kiss on Naruto's cheek. F.F.Fo. For luck. She offered with a small smile. Naruto chuckled softly, leaning forward and resting his forehead against hers. I thought we covered this. He pouted. I'm too awesome to need luck. Their heads separated and he began to make his way towards the est area, pausing after a few steps and turning to face Hinata again, his grin becoming softer, more sincere. Thanks. He spoke gently. I'll be right back, I just need to, but Sasuke in his place. Hinata giggled slightly and nodded. I'll be watching. She promised. Byakugan. She intoned. The veins around her eyes bulged as chakra pushed through them. He pushed his way through the throng of people surrounding the testing area, coming to the front just in time to see Sasuke throw the last of his knives at the targets, managing to nick the further's target, but not landing a solid hit. Naruto ran his eyes over the targets. Sasuke had all 6 shuriken embedded firmly in the 7-meter target, each in a lethal position. 3 of his kunai had hit the 9-meter target, and a scratch indicated that a 4th had been thrown. However, only 2 of the hits that had landed would have killed the target. Iruka nodded. Good job, Sasuke, you've got the highest score so far. He praised Sasuke, setting off a predictable tide of praise from the girls of the class, giving a small grunt in response. Of course he was the best, he was Uchiha. Iruka went and pulled the kunai free of the targets, gathering up the ones that had missed from the ground, before glancing at his list. Not that he needed it by now. Uzumaki, Naruto. He announced. Naruto grinned as he took the offered weaponry, finally a subject he was actually good at. He weighed the weapons, getting a feel for their weight and checking the balance, a reflex born of using poor quality weapons, where the balance was prone to changing from knife to knife. Taking a soft breath, he stepped into position, palming the knives before letting them fly. His first 4 hits slammed straight into the head and chest of the 7-meter target, earning him cheers from the concealman's daughters and grumbles from others. He sighed and shook his head. This was boring. Why too easy. He glanced down at his remaining weapons, 2 kunai and 6 shuriken, and smiled, flicking the 2 knives at the 9-meter target. They landed at about the same height on his chest, one on the left that would have pierced the heart of a real human, and one on the right. Nodding to himself, Naruto let the 6 shuriken fly in quick succession, each on hitting its mark with a resound thud as the steel edge bit into the wooden dummy. The class erupted into giggles as the last shuriken embedded itself in the unfortunate target's belly, and Iruka shook his head, despite the grin tugging at his lips. He didn't know whether to be annoyed or proud of the steel smiley face, now embedded in the 9-meter target. Well, I can't fault your accuracy, I guess. He muttered. Naruto laughed and grinned, ignoring the crowd as he made his way back towards Hinata, his broad grin growing slightly when he saw the smile adorning her face, the bulging veins that framed her Byakugan receding as he came towards her. Why you die? Did well, Naruto-kun. Hinata praised softly. Naruto laughed and grinned as he plopped himself down next to his shy girlfriend. Thanks, I guess your luck really helped. He chuckled, making Hinata blush. Slightly number. Alright, now for the Taijutsu section. Iruka announced again. I'll call you out in alphabetical order. When your name is called, join me in the sparring ring. The goal of the task is to avoid a solid hit from me for as long as you can. He grinned, his eyes drifting to Sasuke and Naruto. You can try and hit me. If you manage to land a good blow on me or last for at least a minute, then you pass this test. The class glanced at each other, slightly worried. Wasn't Iruka-sensei a chunin? How were they supposed to fight that? However, seeing their worry, Iruka grinned. Don't worry, I'll be going easy. He reassured them anyway. First up, Aburami, Shino. The boy stepped forward into the ring, watching Iruka behind his dark glasses as Iruka rattled off the rules for their spar. No jutsu, no weapons, and no insects. He waited for the stoic boy to nod his approval before slipping into his own stance. Alright then, good luck. Start. Once again, Naruto and Hinata tuned out the rest of the class as they sat together, their shoulders touching as they drew strength from each other. Naruto felt the weight on his shoulder increase, and Hinata leant further against him. He smiled warmly and began to run a hand absently through her hair. How did she keep it so soft? It was like stroking silk. Hearing a soft sawing sound, he glanced at Hinata out of the corner of his eye and chuckled. She'd fallen asleep. She was resting her head on his shoulder, her eyes closed as she snored gently. He smiled peacefully. Hinata-chan even snored beautifully. You ga, Hinata. Iruka's voice cut across the crowd. Naruto glanced at Hinata, seeing she wasn't about to wake up anytime soon. It really did seem to be a shame to wake her. If the smile on her face was any indication, she was having a good dream. He sighed and shook her softly. Wake up, Hinata-chan, wake up. He cooed. Hinata squirmed slightly at the sound of his voice, snuggling herself against him, making Naruto blush. No, they're 5 minutes. Sleepy. His speech became indecipherable, mumbles into his shoulder for a bit. Naruto-kun, she finished. Naruto's blush increased slightly. Naruto-kun, huh? Hinata. Iruka called. Your turn. He gently shook Hinata. Come on, Hinata, wake up. He hissed insistently, it's your turn. Hinata's eyes slowly opened, huh? She mumbled blearily, I was having a good dream. Naruto chuckled, your turn to fight Iruka, you can go back to sleep afterwards, okay? Naruto's words as well as the situation finally pierced the sleep-induced haze of her brain, and she stiffened, she'd fallen asleep on Naruto-kun. She knew she shouldn't have stayed up late last night. What if he was mad? At this point what he had said hit home and her cheeks lit up, he'd said she could sleep on him again. Only the fact she was still leaning against Naruto kept her from swaying. Hinata-chan, Iruka-sensei's waiting. Naruto reminded her. Hinata gasped softly and leapt to her feet, rushing, as fast as was dignified, to Iruka. Naruto following her with a grin, good luck Hinata-chan, try not to kick his ass too badly. Iruka smiled as he saw a flustered Hinata emerge from the class and step into the sparring ring, an amused Naruto standing on the edge of the ring, watching Hinata expectantly. His slightly annoyed frown morphed into a knowing grin as his eyes flitted between the pair. I'm sorry, did I interrupt your fun? He teased. Hinata's face changed into a slightly confused frown, what did Iruka-sensei mean by that? Whilst Naruto, who definitely knew exactly what Iruka had implied, lit up in a bright blush. No. We die. Die. Didn't. He stammered, shaking his head frantically. Iruka burst out laughing, their reactions were completely inverted. Naruto was acting like Hinata and Hinata like the normal clueless Naruto. Of course that quickly supplied a mental image of the two wearing each other's clothes, which only served to worsen his laughing fit. Naruto frowned and turned to Hinata. Forget what I said, Hinata, kick his ass. He exclaimed. Hinata blushed softly, he had such confidence in her, he really thought she could beat a Chunin, her teacher no less. It seemed completely at odds with almost everything else anyone had said about her abilities. She took a deep calming breath. Byakugan. The veins around her eyes bulged, she'd give it her best shot, for Naruto. Seeing Hinata was ready to fight, Iruka brought his laughter under control and got into the academy stance, although he couldn't help but threw a jibe Naruto's way as he did so, getting your girlfriend to fight your battles then Naruto. The low growl that escaped Naruto's throat made those students around him back off. Oh, I can't wait till my turn. Iruka shook his head, chuckling softly. Alright Hinata, you know the rules. Hinata blushed. See can you repeat them? She asked, she hadn't really been paying any attention to the fights before this. Iruka chuckled and nodded. No jutsu or weapons, and in your case only use a small amount of chakra in your strikes. He grinned. Alright, ready. Hinata nodded. Start. Hinata shot forward even as the word was leaving Iruka's lips, striking out at his legs, aiming to end the fight quickly. Iruka reacted on instinct and spun around to strike, she was fast. Most Chunin and any Jonin would still be able to dance circles around her, but still, for an academy student that was very impressive. Hinata turned on her heels and once more pressed her offensive, forcing Iruka backwards towards the edge of the ring. What had gotten into Hinata? She normally fought purely defensively, but now. He found himself getting more and more frustrated with the academy Jutsu style, with few dodges and a lot of blocks. It was a very poor style to use against a Hyuga. Woo. Go Hinata. Naruto cheered happily, his previous anger completely forgotten as he watched his girlfriend force their teacher on the defensive and keep him there. Sure, she might not be landing any blows, but Iruka was having to focus entirely on his defensive maneuvers. Hinata slowed her attacks for a brief second and blushed in response to Naruto's praise, and that fraction of a second was all the time Iruka needed to switch to the offensive. Hinata taking a few glancing blows as she struggled to cope with the sudden switch from offensive to defensive. Iruka pressed his advantage, pushing Hinata back and regaining the ground he had lost during her attacks, before finally spotting a small hole in her guard and going for it, his foot landing firmly on her chest and driving the air from her lungs, ending the spar. Iruka grinned. Wow, you lasted for 2.5 minutes Hinata, great job. Hinata gasped to refill her lungs, feeling numb, she'd failed Naruto-kun. She'd tried, she really had, but it still wasn't enough. He must hate her now. A heavy sob heaved through her body as her eyes filled with tears. She'd blown it, her one chance with Naruto, all because she was so weak, so useless. Naruto ran out to Hinata, grinned broadly, her fight was awesome. Hey Hinata-chan. His grin faded into a worried frown as he approached. Are you okay? He questioned worriedly, bending down to try and see her face despite her bowed head and seeing tears in her eyes. You're crying. Did Iruka-sensei hurt you? He shot a glare at Iruka even as he asked the question. Hinata shook her head. I'm sorry. She whispered quietly. Naruto frowned, leaning down next to Hinata. What do you mean? Sorry for what? He asked quietly, aware that everyone in the class was staring. I let you d Hinata continued. Tried my har. Ha. Hard. Hardest, but I cowl. Co. Couldn't even touch Iruka s. Sensei. I'm a f. Failure, and. Now you hate me, her me changing into a keening whine as she sobbed, her tears finally falling as she told Naruto of her failure. Naruto frowned deeply. Look at me, Hinata. He urged, look at me. Iruka made his way forward wanting to help his sobbing student, but a look from Naruto stopped him in his tracks, giving Naruto a small, almost imperceivable, nod to show he understood. He stood to watch, although he remained ready to join in, should he deem it necessary. Hinata slowly lifted her head to look in Naruto's eyes, finding them still filled with the same kindness and adoration she always saw when he looked at her, instead of the disappointment or hatred she's been expecting. He placed his hands on her shoulders, gazing deep into her eyes. You didn't fail me. He insisted strongly. You tried your best, I saw it, you did great. His eyes never left hers as his tone just dared her to say otherwise. Hinata began before Naruto cut her off, gently shaking her. No buts. He snapped angrily. He moved his head forward, so his forehead was touching hers. Hinata, this time his voice was quiet and emotional. I love you, no matter what happens you'll never ever be a failure in my eyes. He leant forward, pressing his lips to hers tenderly, the moment somewhat spoiled by the murmurs of the class as they watched, the girls awing at the romantic scene, whilst the boys mumbling about the dead last getting a girlfriend before they did. Hinata froze. Why? You love me? She echoed in disbelief. Naruto nodded yes, with all my heart. He smiled warmly. You're the kindest, sweetest, most beautiful, most perfect person I've ever met. I don't know who keeps telling you that you're a failure, but they're clearly insane, so don't pay any attention to them. The FFF, what am I then? Kyuubi asked. Naruto could hear the pout on her voice. You know that everything I've said about Hinata applies to you too, Kyuubi-chan. Naruto replied happily. Have a good sleep. Yeah, I did. Kyuubi yawned back. So if you feel like that, why didn't you ever tell me? Now there was a faint hint of actual jealousy in her voice. Hinata sniffed back her tears and kissed Naruto firmly on the lips. Thank you. She whispered softly. Thank you. Naruto grinned as he stroked Hinata's head, holding her close to him. No need to thank me, it's the truth. He replied. I've been thinking about how I felt about both of you for a while. Naruto admitted slowly. I didn't really mean to say all of it, I just needed to tell her she wasn't a failure, and it just kinda came out. He glanced at Hinata, who had gone limp in his arms, and found the girls had fallen asleep once again, emotionally exhausted. Lifting the girl up, he carried her back through the crowd and leant her down by the tree, bending down and kissing her forehead. Pleasant dreams, Hinata-chan. He murmured softly before taking his seat next to her to wait for his turn to fight Iruka. Iruka shook his head and smiled warmly. Young love really was beautiful. Alright, back to business. Iadra, Jason, come forward please. So? What do you feel about me? Kyuubi asked after a pause, her voice sounding slightly nervous and hopeful, along small traces of jealousy still lingering in her tone, despite her best attempts to disguise them. Naruto gave a soft smile, glancing up at the sky. Kyuubi-chan, you know I love you, I know you do. You're the first person who ever said they loved me. I have no way of saying how important you are to me. He sighed softly. I'd happily face anything if it would make you even the slightest bit happier. You are my one confidant, the one who I know I can trust. You're perfect in almost every sense of the word. I know I'll never deserve your love, yet you give it to me anyway. He shook his head honestly. I really don't know how to word this, anything I can say about you just doesn't feel strong enough to describe my feelings. Oh, Naruto. Kyuubi murmured softly. Come in here and kiss me. Naruto chuckled softly, leaning against a tree. He knew that tone was for when no wasn't an acceptable answer. Gladly. He agreed enthusiastically, closing his eyes and concentrating, finding himself deposited right outside Kyuubi-chan's house. Smiling, he opened the door and stepped inside, only to be bowled back out the door as a happy Kyuubi tackle glomped him, her tails trailing behind her as she dove at Naruto. Before Naruto really knew what was happening, he was lying on the grass with Kyuubi's tongue trying to force its way down his throat. He groaned into the kiss as he collected his wits and began to reciprocate, wrapping his arms around Kyuubi as she wrapped her tails around his, her hands fisting in his hair and holding his face against hers. They broke apart after a few minutes of frantic kissing that probably would have been impossible in the real world, where breathing was necessary for life. Did you mean it? Kyuubi asked. What you said? Naruto nodded, removing one hand from her back and cupping her cheek. Of course I did, I'm just sorry I couldn't word it better. He shook his head and frowned. It was hard to voice his feelings for either Kyuubi-chan or Hinata-chan. No, you did fine, perfect even. Kyuubi reassured him, darting forward for another heavy kiss and fervently wishing for Naruto to take it further. She had promised him she wouldn't push as long as he told her when he was ready. He really didn't understand exactly how worked up these sessions made her. They broke apart. Naruto smiled as he lay in the grass with Kyuubi, watching the clouds in the sky of his mindscape drift by Naruto, filling Kyuubi in on what she'd missed so far in the exams, their chat occasionally interspersed by kissing sessions. Naruto pushed himself to his feet, grinning broadly. Oh yes, Iruka was gonna pay for the joke earlier and for interrupting his time with Kyuubi-chan. He closed his eyes for a moment and opened them again, the illusion of his Kekkei Genkai now in place. Taking one last quick glance at Hinata, he made his way to the sparring ring. The jutsu was always one of his worst skills, next to genjutsu and anything that required patience, but with Kyuubi-chan's help, he had finally got the academy style down, and he was confident he would be able to kick Iruka-sensei's butt. Iruka gulped softly as he saw the scheming grin on Naruto's face. That grin never meant anything good. Are you ready? He asked, shaking off his worry. Naruto nodded. Yeah, I'm good, Iruka-sensei. He agreed, rotating his arms to loosen them up and dropping into the usual academy style. Iruka allowed himself a sigh of relief. Naruto was just using the academy style. He had been worried that he'd used his eyes to learn something more advanced. Okay, ready, go. Naruto ran forward, immediately opening with a flurry of kicks and punches that Iruka diverted or dodged. Iruka jumped back, putting a little distance between them, hoping he could get himself on the offensive. Naruto was good for an academy student. His forms were still a little jerky. The style obviously didn't suit the young ninja, but he was fast. Based on what he had seen so far, Iruka would place him on the upper end of average, but considering he had been near the bottom only a few months ago, it was a spectacular improvement. Closing the gap Iruka had created, Naruto continued his offensive, frowning as Iruka easily diverted his strikes and wove around all his attacks. Iruka grinned as he saw Naruto beginning to get frustrated and decided to rile him up further. Come on, Naruto, your girlfriend did better than this. He teased. Naruto smiled warmly and nodded. Yeah, she's awesome, isn't she? He said softly. Iruka raised an eyebrow, surprised. He really did like her, didn't he? Naruto struck out with a quick kick aimed at Iruka's knee, but the Chunin grinned and grabbed Naruto's leg. Got ya. He muttered, twisting with the momentum of Naruto's kick and adding his own, wrenching Naruto off his feet and tossing him out of the arena. Iruka knew that he was showing off a little by winning that way, but he didn't really mind. Naruto had already impressed him enough to pass this section of the exam, and even if he hadn't landed a solid blow, a few bruises stood testament to the force behind his attacks. Naruto pushed his face out of the dirt, spitting to clear his mouth of the horrible, lingering taste. Ugh, I'll get you for that, Iruka-sensei. He groused good-naturedly. Iruka chuckled and nodded. Sure you will. He agreed before turning his attention to the rest of the class. So does anyone have any weapon skills they wish to display? He asked, hoping none of them would be like that 10-10 girl last year who had spent a full hour going through all her proficiencies with him. He nodded as around 6 hands went up and called the volunteers forward. Naruto trudged back over to Hinata's sleeping form, letting his bloodline fade as he went, and sat down, rubbing the leg Iruka had tossed him by. It was slightly sore, but the pain was fading quickly. I guess this means more to jutsu practice. Kyuubi nodded. Yeah, it does. She confirmed, but you did very well. Very well. Naruto muttered. He kicked my ass. He's a Chunin and you aren't even a ninja yet. Kyuubi retorted. HMMPH. Naruto grunted. I'll be a ninja in about an hour. But you're not one now, are you? Kyuubi pressed. Deflating, Naruto conceded to point. No, not yet. Kyuubi nodded. Your speed was good and your strength, the only problem you had was the lack of reflexes. You simply haven't used the style long enough for it to be fluid. She shrugged. That and a more offensive style would suit you better. Naruto nodded, a soft smile on his face as he basked in the praise he had craved for so many years. He knew the style didn't suit him, but he hadn't seen anyone using a style he liked. Do you know any good styles that I could use? He asked. Kyuubi gave a sigh and shook her head. No, I thought we'd covered this. Me fox demon, you human. I never really learned any human styles, at least I never learned anything more than the very first forms. She shrugged. Naruto slumped slightly and nodded. Right, sorry. He replied, pausing for a second. Didn't you say you could make me into a Hanyu? Then I can use what you can teach me. Kyuubi frowned softly. I can. She agreed softly, but I won't, not now, not yet. She had to admit that the thought of a Hanyu, or even full demon, Naruto, certainly appealed much more to her the more she thought on it, but he would almost definitely gain some more traits that would be hard to hide and would cause Naruto far more trouble than it was worth. Naruto frowned. Why not? He questioned. Kyuubi was saved from having to answer as a soft groan from Hinata caught Naruto's attention, and he turned his head to see her eyes fluttering as she slowly awoke. Hinata-chan. He grinned. Hinata's eyes opened softly as she looked around her, taking a moment to register her surroundings. Naruto-kun. She muttered, recognizing his voice. Yes. Naruto answered. Hinata locked onto the source of the voice and hugged him fiercely. Naruto-kun. She exclaimed, happily hugging him tight, as though afraid he would vanish if she let go. Naruto wrapped his arms around her frail form with a warm smile and absently rubbed her back in what he hoped was a caring way. She was muttering something, but he couldn't quite catch what, so he strained his ears to listen to her whispered mantra. Thank you, thank you. Naruto shook his head softly, running a hand through her hair and placing a gentle kiss on her forehead. No need to thank me. He assured her, but she continued to anyway. Eventually the two of them just lapsed back into a silence. Iruka finished with the last of the weapons tests and nodded, looking around the throng of students, satisfied that they were as calm as they were going to get. Alright everyone. He announced, let's go inside and we'll move to the ninjutsu and genjutsu part of the test. Turning smartly on his heels, Iruka began to make his way back inside the class, following on his heels. Naruto groused softly as he pushed himself to his feet, holding out his hand to help pull Hinata up. Hinata blushed and hesitated for a split second before accepting the proffered hand with a gentle smile. Naruto smiled as he wrapped his hand around hers, enjoying the smooth feeling of her skin against his rougher, calloused hand, and pulled her to her feet. Come on, let's go get our headbands. He declared happily, heading after the class, tugging Hinata behind him. As the class filed back into their room, Iruka smiled as he walked over to Mizuki. You finished the marking? He asked as he slid into his seat. Mizuki nodded and gave a small smile in return. Yeah, not a bad crop this year. Iruka shook his head and grinned absently, rubbing a few of the bruises he'd gained from his various spars. Tell me about it. He took the sheets of paper and leafed through them, doing a quick count to ensure none of them had gone missing and nodding as he found them all there. So how your mysterious headache? Iruka joked, air quoting the final two words with a grin. Mizuki shook his head. Fine, the quiet did it some good. He replied, shooting a glare at the class. Of course it's staging a comeback now. Iruka laughed once more and nodded, turning his attention back to the class, running through a quick series of hand signs under the table, the class falling almost perfectly silent save for the occasional mumble. What are they seeing? Mizuki asked. The Hokage coming in to give a speech. Iruka replied with a shrug. Is the old man coming here? Naruto's voice rang across the classroom. Naruto, Iruka exclaimed, you can hear us? Naruto blinked. Yeah, of course I can. Why? Shouldn't I be able to? He asked, confused. Iruka made the hand seals once again, focusing the genjutsu on Naruto, who had no visible reaction. Well. Naruto pressed when there was no answer forthcoming. Iruka and Mizuki's eyes widened. Well, I think you passed the genjutsu exam. Iruka said, stunned. The technique had no effect on the boy. Was the fox helping? Genjutsu was the fox's speciality after all. You used a genjutsu on me? Naruto accused. Iruka nodded. Yeah, but it didn't seem to have any effect. He frowned. Do you know why? Naruto blanched for a second, a grin then flashed across his face before it settled into a look of concentration. I don't really know. I felt a weird tingly sensation in my eyes for a moment. Could that be it? He asked aloud. Hey Kyuubi-chan. Do you know why it didn't work? He questioned. Iruka and Mizuki exchanged glances. They knew roughly what his eyes could do from a report the Hokage had circulated, and it hadn't mentioned anything about immunity from genjutsu. Of course it did make sense. Naruto's Kekkei Genkai was obviously an ancestor of the Sharingan, and that could see through genjutsu too. Both Chunin filed the information away, Mizuki, so he could use it against the little demon, in Iruka, so he could inform the Hokage of the new discovered ability. So it was your eyes? Iruka pushed, wanting a confirmation from Naruto. Yeah, I do. Kyuubi answered Naruto's question. It's because of my Yaki in your system. Genjutsu is the art of turning the opponent's chakra against them, using your own to direct their chakra to move as you will. But because of both the sheer quantity of chakra you contain and the additional power of my Yaki, such a weak genjutsu would never work. She paused, and good save on the explanation. Naruto beamed at Kyuubi's praise. Yeah, it was. He agreed, passing off his grin as happiness over discovering a new power his eyes held. That's so awesome. He added enthusiastically, wanting to reinforce that idea. So why won't weak genjutsu work, and what will work then? He pressed Kyuubi. Well, trying a low-level genjutsu like that is like trying to divert a river with a single plank of wood. In order to make it affect you, they will need to put a lot more chakra into the technique. Some S-rank genjutsu might be able to affect you, but a small surge of Yaki will instantly break any genjutsu you do get placed under. Naruto's grin got even broader. He was almost totally immune to genjutsu. So what now? He asked. Iruka shrugged. Wait for the others to break out of the genjutsu. He instructed. Naruto nodded and leant back in his chair, closing his eyes and communing with Kyuubi to pass the time. The two teachers shared another look before returning to watching the class, smiling faintly as they felt surges of chakra from the few pupils that had already figured out they were in a genjutsu. 10 minutes later, Iruka took pity on the last few stragglers still caught in his genjutsu and released the technique, the wide-eyed confusion on the faces of the newly freed students sending ripples of laughter through the rest of the class. After giving the more confused pupils a few moments to get reconnected to reality, he clapped his hands for silence. After waiting the few seconds it took for the noise to actually peter out, Iruka spoke up once more. Alright everyone, now we move on to the final part of the exam. The ninjutsu test. He paused for a moment, letting his gaze pass over the class. When I call your name, you will come forward and demonstrate your ability to perform the 3 academy jutsu, then you may perform up to 2 other jutsu as extra credit. If those jutsu are offensive in nature, then we will take you out to the target range after the test to allow you to demonstrate it. Do not use an offensive jutsu inside." He glowered at the class to reinforce his message. Is that clear? Disharmonious, chorus of "Yes sensei." Echoed back from the class. Iruka gave a satisfied nod. "Alright, Aburami, Shino." Naruto grinned as he turned his illusion on to watch the class perform. They might have some tricks worth learning, and he'd rather have an excuse as to how he'd learnt it. "So, Hinata. Do you have any extra jutsu you're going to show Iruka-sensei?" he asked, leaning back in his chair watching Shino's clone with only slight interest. Hinata shook her head. No. She said softly. Naruto let his seat fold back into place and pouted. "Me neither, my stupid sensei refused to teach me anything else." "Boy." Kyuubi huffed. "I told you we needed to work on the 3 academy jutsu, you know, the ones you need to actually pass the exam." "Still." Naruto protested. "You said you knew thousands of jutsu. Can't you teach me even one?" Hinata, giggling at the childish pout on his face when he had insulted this teacher of his weight. Teacher? She'd never seen Naruto with a teacher. He always trained alone, didn't he? Who is y. Your teacher?" Hinata asked. Naruto swore profusely in his head. He'd said teacher. Stupid. Racking his brain, he quickly searched for a get-out clause. "Iruka-sensei, of course." He answered, breathing a small sigh of relief when he saw the look of understanding flash across Hinata's face. "Well, can't you teach me even one of those 1,000 jutsu?" Kyuubi gave a nervous chuckle, a habit she had somewhat picked up off Naruto. Well, I don't really know thousands of jutsu, I know of that many, but I don't really know how to use human jutsu. They aren't really designed to be used with Yaki, so I never managed to use them." Naruto deflated and gave a disappointed groan, causing Hinata to glance at him. "What's wrong Naruto-kun?" she asked. Naruto waved off her question. "It's nothing, don't worry about it." He assured her with a grin. However, she still looked skeptical, so he leant over and gave her a small peck on the cheek and another smile. "Really, I'm fine." Seeing Hinata accepting his reassurance now, he turned his attention inwards once more. "So, how many jutsu do you know?" Kyuubi hesitated. "Human jutsu? Not many, maybe 10, 12, tops." There was a pause and Naruto could almost feel her shrug. "But they're all S rank. There's no way you could use one without people asking questions we won't be able to answer. Heck, even practicing for most of them will level acres of forest." Naruto was practically drooling as he considered what kind of jutsu could level that much land. "Whilst practicing, you've got to teach me those," he demanded. Kyuubi giggled and smiled softly, glad that Naruto wasn't holding any resentment towards her for that little. Well, it hadn't exactly been a lie, but she had deliberately worded the truth to make him believe something else. "I will, when we find somewhere you can practice without getting caught," she said. "Promise?" Naruto prompted eagerly. Kyuubi gave an unseen nod. "Promise." She agreed, pausing for a moment before continuing, a lusty leer on her face. "Of course, you'll need to repay me somehow," she whispered huskily. Naruto felt his face flush red and the heat of arousal stir around in his stomach. "Don't worry, I will." He agreed eagerly. That one almost always preceded the best makeout sessions he had with Kyuubi-chan. Kyuubi smiled. "Good," she purred. "I can't wait." Naruto nodded his agreement to Kyuubi's statement, but didn't voice it. Turning his attention back to the exam, he focused on forcing his blush back down and quashing the fire Kyuubi's tone had lit in his belly. "You're next, aren't you?" he asked, glancing at Hinata. "Yeah." Hinata mumbled, taking deep breaths to calm herself before the exam. She barely registered the question or her own response. However, she couldn't ignore it when Naruto pulled her into a hug and planted a quick kiss on her lips. He grinned as they separated. "Your luck really helped me in my spar, so I'm giving it back," he declared before leaning in and sneaking another kiss just as Iruka called her name. "And there's my luck too, you know, just in case." His grin widened. "Show them how awesome I know you are." Hinata blushed red under Naruto's loud praise and felt his confidence buoying her up once again, her face setting into a determined frown as she walked down to the front of the class. Despite his reassurances to the contrary, she still felt she had let Naruto down somehow during her fight with Iruka, and she would not fail him again. Ever. Iruka nodded. "Alright Hinata, why don't you start with a clone? We need at least 3 clones to pass." Hinata nodded curtly. "Okay." She replied with a firmness and confidence no one, except Naruto, knew she possessed. She flashed through the hand seals and called 5 clones into being. Iruka and Mizuki exchanged a glance. This was a side of Hinata they didn't know existed. Well, Iruka had seen it once before, during their spar earlier today. Iruka allowed a small serene smile to form on his face. Naruto really was helping Hinata overcome her shyness and self-confidence issues. Hinata smiled softly as she dispelled her clones and walked back up the class, dropping back into her seat with a small pleased grin on her face. "I did it," she muttered, pleased. Naruto gave her a broad grin and wrapped an arm around her. "Of course you did." He offered it. "Told you, you are awesome." He paused for a moment, his grin growing slightly. Not as awesome as me, but still awesome. He leant over and kissed her gently on the cheek. I knew you'd do it, he continued, his voice soft and sincere, the voice of what Hinata was rapidly realizing was the real Naruto, the one hidden behind the false smiles and loud exclamations. Hinata flushed red and smiled softly at Naruto. Thank you. Naruto didn't reply verbally, but just gave Hinata a small gentle smile. Soon enough it was Naruto's turn to display his ninjutsu, Sasuke, shooting him a challenging smirk as the blonde ninja Kyuubi walked to the front of the class, challenging Naruto to beat his own display of 10 near-perfect clones. Iruka nodded and smiled at Naruto. Alright then, let's see your henge. He paused for a fraction of a second before adding hurriedly, and no funny business. Naruto let a small pout cross his face. Oh. He whined softly before shrugging and flashing through the hand seals with a practiced ease. Henge. He announced firmly as a thin shroud of smoke concealed his form for a few moments. As the smoke faded, it revealed the figure of the Sandaime Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, who gave a very Naruto-like foxy grin. Iruka and Mizuki exchanged a glance. If it wasn't for the fact they knew it was a henge, and the way he was acting, they could have sworn they were looking at their Hokage. Very good, Naruto. Mizuki said with a nod, Iruka giving a silent nod of agreement and noting down in the file that Naruto's henge was exemplary. So what now? Naruto inquired eagerly, letting the henge fade away now it had served its purpose. Show us the kawarimi. Iruka instructed with a soft smile. Naruto nodded and scanned the class for something he could swap with, making a point of ignoring the log that had been placed in the corner of the room for just that purpose. A scheming grin slowly formed as he flicked through the brief series of hand signs and focused his chakra. In a small puff of chakra he swapped himself with his seat, grinning. Hinata gave a soft eep of surprise as Naruto suddenly appeared next to her. Although her surprised squeak was cut off as Naruto stole a kiss from Hinata with a broad grin and an exclamation of surprise. Before swapping back with his seat and returning to the front of the classroom, a silly grin on his face and leaving a bright red Hinata in his wake. Iruka sighed and shook his head, although he did smile softly. Alright, your kawarimi is good. He conceded before a soft frown settled on his features. Now came Naruto's worst technique. He prayed the young boy would be able to pass where he had failed so many times before throughout the year. Now, finally, will you show us your clones? I need you to form at least 3 convincing clones. He leant forward, resting his head on his meshed fingers. In the back of the classroom, Hinata also frowned softly in worry for her blonde boyfriend. She knew, perhaps better than anyone else, exactly how much practice Naruto had put into his clones throughout the year without success. Naruto-kun. She mumbled quietly, perhaps if she wished hard enough Naruto would be able to pull off another miracle like his arm. Her frown deepened slightly into a frown of genuine annoyance and anger as the memory of that particular night flashed through her mind. What had Naruto-kun done to deserve that kind of treatment from the villagers, and why exactly did he seem to consider such actions normal? Naruto smiled broadly. No problem. He declared loudly, thanks to Kyuubi-chan, he had finally found out exactly why his clones had never worked properly. He simply had too much chakra and overloaded the technique. The outer shell of chakra that stabilized the clone just couldn't contain the vast amount of chakra he placed in each clone. Unfortunately, Kyuubi had also informed Naruto that he would need high Chunin or possibly even Kage level control in order to pull that technique off, and since he couldn't really improve control without simultaneously increasing his available reserves, it was unlikely he would ever be able to perform the clone technique. However, Naruto had never been one to take no for an answer and had found another solution to his problem. He had remembered Iruka telling the class what hand signs were for, and that had got him thinking. If he just ignored hand signs entirely, then he would greatly increase the chakra cost of each clone he made, and that would allow him to perform the technique without needing years worth of chakra control training. Clone Jutsu. He announced, firmly smirking as 20 clones burst into existence around him. He grimaced slightly as he saw 4 of his clones look sickly and bloated. Obviously he still needed more practice, but was pleased that he had at least gotten the number of clones he was aiming for. His first attempt had resulted in the formation of around 500 clones instead of the 10 he had been going for. How's that? He grinned at his teachers, smirking slightly as he felt Sasuke team's jealous glare burn against the back of his head. The look of annoyance flashed across Mizuki's face for a moment but was quickly quashed by the experienced shinobi and replaced with an impressed smile. 16 working clones. He said. Iruka nodded, dumbly regaining his composure. Yes, and no hand signs, very impressive. He added, making a note on his paper, you definitely passed this section of the test. Naruto beamed at his favorite teacher, dispelling his clones, before making his way back to his seat and smiling at Hinata, who smiled back softly, happy that Naruto had been able to perform the clone jutsu so well. Once the rest of the class had gone through the test, Iruka picked up his mark book and quickly scanned it to ensure every student had at least some marks in each section. "Alright, does anyone have any other jutsu they wish to show us outside?" he questioned. Almost immediately Sasuke's hand shot up and the boy shot a challenging glare at Naruto, just daring the blonde boy to try and beat him at this part of the exam. In addition, Kiba's hand went up, the young Inuzuka eager to show off his newly learned fang over fang technique. Iruka and Mizuki nodded. "Anyone else?" Mizuki asked, scanning the class, and when no other student was forthcoming, he nodded and took the mark book from Iruka. "Alright, we'll go out into the target ranges and you can display your jutsu. The rest of you have an hour to relax before we announce the results." Iruka spoke up, pushing himself out of the seat and grinning. "If anyone wants they can come and watch Sasuke and Kiba perform their jutsu." He gave a little sigh and shook his head as that set off a small cascade of girlish muttering about going to watch their Sasuke-kun. "Alright, class dismissed, see you in 1 hour," he said. "Sasuke, Kiba, follow me. Oh. And Mizuki, there is some aspirin in the nurse's office if your headache is getting to you." The verbal air quotes around the word headache were obvious, and Iruka smirked softly as he heard Mizuki's annoyed growl in reply. The class had congregated outside their classroom after the hour break they had been given, and Iruka started calling people in, and they either came out with headbands or didn't. So far it seemed that only a third of the class was passing, and with each person who failed to get his or her headband, the rest of the class got more and more nervous. Hinata took a shaky breath as June stepped into the classroom to get her results, and, if she passed, her headband. She would be going in next, and she just couldn't stop the thoughts of failure bouncing through her head. What would she do if she didn't pass? What would her father do? What would Naruto do if she betrayed his trust? So Naruto took her hand in his and gave it a gentle squeeze to catch her attention. "You'll do fine." He spoke softly when Hinata looked up at him. He gave her his best smile. "Trust me, there's no way you can fail." But Hinata began to protest. She was really happy Naruto had such faith in her, but she really didn't feel she could live up to his expectations. Naruto let go of her hand and placed his hands on her shoulders, his own fierce gaze meeting her timid, uncertain one. "How many times do I have to say this? You're not a failure," he insisted, "and when I find whoever it is who put that stupid idea in your head, I'm gonna kick their ass." He growled quietly, speaking more to himself than Hinata. "I know you will pass this test, and even if, by some," he paused, searching for a good phrase, his forehead scrunching in that adorable, in Hinata's opinion, way it always did whenever Naruto was thinking hard, free chance, he continued, finally making up his mind, "fail this exam, I will still love you, and I won't think any less of you. Promise?" Hinata asked gently, acutely aware of just how many classmates were now eavesdropping on their, supposedly private, conversation. "You got Hinata, your turn." Iruka interrupted before Naruto could respond, a disappointed June trying, with little success, to use Iruka as a distraction to slip away before her friend saw she hadn't received a headband. Naruto held onto Hinata's hand for a second as she tried to follow Iruka into the classroom and leant in, planting a small kiss on her cheek. "I promise." He agreed with another smile as he released her hand and let her enter the classroom. Naruto leant against the wall opposite the door to wait for what would surely be the longest minute or two of his life. He had every confidence that Hinata would pass, but he still couldn't quiet that little voice in the back of his head saying, "What if? She'll do fine." Kyuubi reassured him gently, "You know she will." Naruto gave the barest of nods. It was still hard for him to converse with Kyuubi without betraying that fact with his body language. "I know, but..." He trailed off, unable to find some realistic reason for Hinata to fail, but still unable to shake his worry. "Hey Naruto." There was a pause whilst the speaker searched for the correct suffix "kun." A familiar voice broke through his conversation, jolting his attention back to the real world. He reopened his eyes and glanced to his left, sure enough seeing Ino standing next to him with a friendly smile on her face. "Oh, hey Ino." Naruto replied happily, slightly unnerved by her sudden friendliness even if he didn't show it. Ino grinned at Naruto's friendly greeting. He hadn't told her off for calling him Naruto-kun. Maybe she did have a good shot at him after all. She had been debating asking him out for a little while anyway. Quite a lot of her friends had suddenly decided to try and woo the blonde boy, which had caught her attention. If there was going to be a competition for his heart, she was determined to win it. She didn't know exactly why the others had so completely changed their views on Naruto and had been determined to find out, doubly so when her friend had refused to tell her their reasons, and after seeing his speech to and treatment of Hinata today, Ino was certain she had seen the reason her friends had fallen for Naruto and was determined to get Naruto for herself. After all, she was definitely much prettier than the shy Hyuga heir, and she deserved to have such a caring boyfriend. "You can call me Ino-chan if you want." Naruto's grin increased a little. "Alright, Ino-chan," he replied. Inside his head Kyuubi was smirking. Ino had just, unintentionally, played right into her plan by giving Naruto an easy choice for his second human mate. Now all she needed to do was work out a way of leaving the seal, and everything would be ready to fall into place. Ino beamed. "Hey Naruto, are you doing anything tonight?" she asked coyly, leaning forward just a little to give Naruto a better view of her chest. Naruto smiled softly and nodded. His understanding of women had improved in leaps and bounds since he started seeing Kyuubi and Hinata, but Naruto was still largely oblivious to any other girl's attempts to come onto him, mainly because he still didn't really think any girl would ever be seriously attracted to him. "Yeah." He replied, "I'm gonna be celebrating with Hinata-chan." He glanced at the classroom door. She should be out any time with or without, no, definitely with her headband. "And then I'll come in and celebrate with you, Kyuubi-chan." He added, wishing for the umpteenth time that Kyuubi wasn't stuck in his head and that he was strong enough to do as he promised and find a way to release her from her undeserved prison. Kyuubi smiled softly. I look forward to our celebration," she purred seductively. Ino's grin faded for an instant before returning to full force. She noted the slight flush in Naruto's cheek and paused. Were he and Hinata? No, Hinata was too shy for that, although she did wonder just how far the pair had gone and how long they had been together. The rumor had them pegged as being an item at least 2 months, but she wasn't certain. "Oh right, well how about tomorrow?" Naruto nodded. "Yeah, I'm not doing much tomorrow." "Why?" Ino smiled broadly. She would win Naruto, yet, well, I was sort of wondering if you wanted to get some lunch or something with me. She asked, a faint blush on her cheeks. She wasn't really used to asking boys on dates, she was usually to one who was asked. Naruto's answer was delayed as the classroom door opened and Hinata stepped out. He spun around to face her, seeing the soft smile on her face and the headband clutched in her hand. His face split into a broad grin as he dashed over, sweeping Hinata off her feet, the shy girl giving a quiet shriek of surprise and spinning her round, laughing. "I knew you would pass, Hinata-chan." He set the, now madly blushing, girl back down on her feet, gently prying the headband from her hand and tying it onto her head. "I told you would do well," he said softly, wrapping his arms around her and holding her close, his voice low and sincere. "You should believe in yourself more." He kissed the steel of her forehead protector. Hinata could feel the heat of the blush in her cheeks as she met Naruto's eyes, those gorgeous blue orbs that sparkled with life and love. Thank you," she mumbled softly, burying her head in his shoulder, oblivious to the gaggle of people watching them with interest, jealousy, or some combination of the two. Naruto gave a small chuckle and bent a little lower, planting another kiss on Hinata, on her cheek this time. "You really don't need to keep thanking me," he murmured. Ino frowned softly as she watched the young couple interact. Damn it, she wanted a boy to treat her like that. A small scheming grin slipped onto her face and she would get what she wanted, she always did. "Naruto-kun," she spoke up. Naruto tore his gaze from Hinata to see what Ino wanted. "Yes." Hinata glared as best she was able at Ino when she heard her call Naruto Naruto-kun, although admittedly her glare wasn't particularly intimidating, even enhanced by the slightly off-putting, in Ino's opinion, side of her Byakugan. Ino had to admit she felt a little guilty about breaking up such a good couple. They were practically made for each other, and Hinata had been chasing him for such a long time. It was kind of nice to finally see her get what she deserved from Naruto. Still, she didn't rise to the top of the class's social ladder by letting things like that stop her. "You never answered me. Would you like to go to lunch tomorrow?" Hinata's face darkened slightly and worry lit her eyes. This was it, she knew Naruto was too good for her, and now. He was going to leave her. Tears sprung into her eyes and she lowered her head, not wanting Naruto, or Ino, to see just how hard his impending breakup was hitting her. Naruto's face flashed with confusion for a moment. In his excitement for Hinata, he had completely forgotten about Ino's offer. He gave a slightly nervous chuckle, removing one hand from Hinata to rub the back of his head absently. "Oh right," he chuckled, turning to Hinata. "Hey, Hinata-chan, Ino-chan wants to get some lunch with me tomorrow. You want to come?" Chapter end. Alright, that's it for today's video guys. Let me know in the comments section how was the story, and also don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I will meet you in another video. Peace out.